Bye. I wonder how many people will join us this morning, but we'll see. But yeah, go we're gonna record, and then like as always, we'll cut whatever.
Okay.
You're great editors.
Good.
But yeah, so you were saying about men are not the worst, but the beard ice bath phenomenon.
Yeah, that's the trend right now, I feel like. And the women need to counter that back with bikinis and ice baths or something. I don't know.
Bikinis and ice bath. Yeah, fair enough.
Just the polarization of it.
What's the temperature like out there right now?
It's snowing
Yeah.
currently, and it is 35 degrees.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like you could go outside and get a similar effect, right?
I was actually sitting outside before this call. Yeah, I was trying to simulate something like that. Colder, wake up. Yes.
And what inspires you there? Are you like a Wim Hof person, or is this sort of a just an Instagram meme type education?
I do Wim Hof. I do multiple, breath practices actually. I've been into this one recently. I've done in the last week. It's called it's a primal breath practice. It's from the Amazonian tribes, and I learned it in Peru. And it works with the 7 energy centers. So you kind of work yourself up in different breath rates as you move up into those different centers. So I've been doing that, and it's pretty meditative. Like you get into it and you're just like, next thing you know, you can just feel yourself moving through these different energies. But it's been a pretty cool practice. I've been doing that actually since I've been in quarantine, since we're in isolation lockdown. And that's been great to do about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, just kind of breaks up the day. And then I usually do Wim Hof. If I do Wim Hof, it's usually in the morning. Mm-hmm. Kind of, it stimulates me more typically.
What's the difference between those for the uninitiated in disciplined breathing practices? What would you say the difference is?
All breath practices, I think, all have an underlying purpose, which is connection back to the body, right? And being present. So I think both of them do that type of contribution to that. But I think the Wim is a lot simpler. It's a sitting. You can sit and do Wim as well. The primal is a standing practice. So you're standing the whole time throughout it. And the biggest difference would just be you're escalating your breath rate in the Amazonian breath practice. And in this one, the Wim Hof, is just a constant circle of breath, right? Where you're constantly connecting the ends of the inhale and the exhale, for, 3 cycles with breath holding.
Right.
And there's no breath holding in the Amazonian.
So what does this Amazonian breathing practice look like? We didn't cue this up at all. I'm just really intrigued.
Oh man. Yeah, that's what we should have done this morning, is the practice.
And
I would have led you through it. So
I would do it.
Yeah, man, it's cool. I would definitely take you through it. It's you start with the first energy center, which is earth. So you start with a rooted breath practice. So a lot of it's and it's all done through nose breath in. So inhale through the nose and then exhale out through the mouth. And the only time that I actually breathe through my nose only is through the level of what we call space. So it goes from earth. Let's see if I can remember this. This will be good. It goes earth, water, fire, air, ether, space, and infinity.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah. So you breathe through each one of those, and how long you last in each one is relative to, I think, just how you're feeling inspired to move to the next system. I've done a practice where this has almost taken me up to an hour, and I've been in fire, or I've been in air, for, maybe 15 minutes. So for example, the earth would be like, breathe in, and then I'd breathe out, and I'm just kind of like a really slow rooted breath. And then let's get to where I'd get to like ether, and I'm actually jumping, and I'm inhaling on the up and I'm exhaling on the out. So it's like, ha, ha, ha. It's like really fast.
Yeah.
And then I'll get to my the space up here, and it's all nasal. So it's like, and you're rubbing your frontal lobe. So really just stimulating, obviously consciousness. And then at the end, the infinity would be a big breath in, and then you're going to buzz like a bee, like that. And what you're doing is you're vibrating the top of your head. So you're just creating a vibration at the top, and then you work yourself all the way back down.
Whoa.
Dude, we should do it. I mean, I'd be down to doing it.
Like right now?
I don't know.
I
don't know.
I would definitely try it. Tell me how you found this, first of all, before I commit to anything.
Okay. So I went to Peru just over a month and a half ago, just the end of January.
Yeah.
And spent 10 days out in the Sacred Valley with a group called Pike TT Institute, and worked with, he doesn't call himself a shaman, but people would probably refer to him as one, Roman Harris, who basically is teaching the people that attended. It's a healing circle, but teaching people about, Eastern philosophy and about your true nature, and just kind of reconnecting to those pieces spiritually, and working on the spiritual side, which I think right now we're kind of all not forced, but I think that Mother Nature is trying to bring us back to that concept of like connecting to self again and really reflecting on what really connection means. Hence we're all in isolation, figuring that out. But yeah, so being in Peru, I think it was an opportunity where I didn't have any devices. I didn't have, and going into that, I was probably like on this freaking routine that I knew wasn't sustainable. Just, I was getting myself into like work projects and, coffee in the morning with, maybe a glass of wine at night. And I was doing this, it was like a really vicious cycle of work. And I felt like, I felt like my body knew it was going to go into quarantine. Like I knew when I got to Peru, it was going to be an opposite experience. And it was interesting because as soon as we didn't have any internet when we got out there, and all the things came at me. Like I got this email right before I lost my internet, from, my coach, who was panicking about this one situation. And I was trying to figure out how to fix it. And it was and I was like, whoa, you're being tested right now. Like that is going to be okay in 10 days, Robin, calm down. And so it was just all these things that came upon me. And as soon as I disconnected from that, let go, got into the process of, just sitting up in the morning and looking at the trees and watching, the clouds go over the mountains and all the things that I live in, Idaho, Wyoming for. But really more so than just being present, it was like being connected to myself and really listening to my heart and being able to have the space to do it. And then with the teachings at the same time. And of course we did, ceremonies with plant medicines throughout the week as well, that allowed us to, which was really intriguing to me, but it allowed me to look at things that I haven't really given notice to or haven't wanted to unveil from a personal level. And it was a great experience just to, at the end of that, I was like, this is what it feels like to connect to yourself and be whole. And then I could really see from that perspective of connectedness, I could really see where I can contribute to the greater whole, which is a purpose outside of myself, and really take that back and share that with obviously the business and the coaches around me. It was freaking amazing, to tell you that. So the breath practice was part of that experience. We went through several types of breath practice. The Amazonian breath practice is more stimulating and works through the energy systems. You finish with a primal scream, at the end of it. And it's just, and every time I do it, still to this day, it's like a reminder of oh, okay, there's a reminder of my connection to myself, my ability to focus, and just know that yesterday I was doing the breath practice, 2 days ago, and I was in it and I was feeling distracted and I was starting to think about other things. And I'm like, no, this is all you need to do right now. This is the thing. Right. And as soon as I said that, it was like it pulled me right back to that state that I felt in Peru, that experience where at least I had, it's like riding a bike. Like, oh yeah, there's the balance. There's the reminder of true connection to self, and how I want to continue showing up in the world, and how I want to continue engaging. And that's really what breath practice is. Breath practice is a reminder of us to reconnect and stay open-hearted. And so it's not a fixer, right?
Right.
For us coaches, I think, all the things that are out there that are fads that coming through, whether it's ice baths or breath work, they're not a fixer or a way to escape the reality of your shadows and your light that you have within you. It's a way to expand yourself.
Yeah.
And hold all the things that we don't like about this world, about ourselves, about the things that we have to challenge and deal with, right? Like the current circumstances we're in now. It's not about averting them or clinging to one idea. So breath work for me is always a reminder of that, of continue expanding my soul and expanding the space I have to hold all the things about the challenges that I'm currently going through. So I'm not clinging to them or averting them.
Mm-hmm.
That was a really roundabout answer about where I got breath work from, but
no, it's good. I would say thorough. I love it.
Okay.
You developed your Amazonian breath practice in Peru. It's such an important reminder. I think our perspective often comes back to three core staples, and regardless of the interaction, it's self-awareness, purpose, self-management. And you'd be sort of hard pressed to convince me or the folks that we work with that there's too much outside of that. And that's what a breathing sort of practice reminds me of. It reminds me of just coming back to a state of self-awareness, something physical. And, we disconnect mind and body artificially all the time. Something physical to bring us back to a state of self-awareness, I think, is a very powerful tool. I think that makes complete sense. It reminds me also, it's interesting. We talk about breathing practice. There's some folks actually on Instagram Live here, which is great, that we hosted a Beyond Strength clinic, which we were about to do together in April, had the quarantine not fallen upon us. But we were down at Oklahoma City with a good friend of some friends of ours down at a place called Athlete Inc. And we did a component of a Beyond Strength clinic was on mindfulness. It was on a breathing and focus and self-awareness practice. And there was, the owner of that gym, great guy, went up to one of the participants who was sort of more of that, maybe like a stereotype coach, a big, heavy, intense, old school coach. And that we are advocates of coaches on the whole. So there's nothing judgmental about what I'm saying right now, but he went up to this person, and that person, just to kind of see how the day was going, that person replied to Jared, our guy, yeah, that sounds pretty cool. That might work for like golf or something, but I don't know if it'd work for our football guys. And it was such an interesting moment, because he didn't realize, this gentleman, that he was talking to a former NFL fullback. And I say that to get back to a little bit of your bio and history, because I think the source of this stuff matters. This isn't just, this is not out in the ether. When you talk about breathing and mindfulness, I think we often bring stigmas to the table, especially if you're a strength coach or a football player, or sort of pick the discipline that has a set of stereotypes attached to it. Mm-hmm. You are, correct me if I've got the bio wrong, were you a 4-time All-American? 5-time, excuse me. Yeah. But there's, this is true of elite performers. And I would even say that there is probably a very real mindfulness about throwing, like what a mindful act that is. Like, you can't be throwing for records and All-American distances and thinking about 8 things at once. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. Well, especially throwing the hammer.
Yeah,
but yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that part of my life, I think my throwing time, when I was 20 years old, was a very physical time of my life as well, though, right? So I feel like, yes, it's mindful in the sense like I want to know that I'm in the circle and that I'm turning in the right direction and that I'm going to release the hammer at the right time. That type of mindfulness for sure. And yeah, I don't want to be thinking about what exam I need to pass, during halfway through my second term, for sure. And I would say mindfulness or focus,
Just being
focus.
present. You gotta be right there in that moment.
Yes. And I think in any sport, right? I think we can say that in anything. You can talk about golf, you want to be present there too. I don't want to be thinking about the next hole or my next drive when I'm trying to make this 12-foot putt, So yes, in sport in general, mindfulness or focus is very key. And having the ability to do that. And I think the best way to do that is really having the connection back to breath and having the connection back to your body. Because if I'm outside of my body and I'm grabbing all the things that I think I need to do on the task list today, that I'm not really in the moment. Right. So staying in the moment, I think in general is always allows us to put our best work forward and also our best performance forward on the sport athletic side. And that does come back to mindfulness, but it comes back to the whole. The whole is being, people don't want to talk about spirituality because they just think we're physical, skin and bones, but we're not. We're energy beings. Okay. So there's energy flowing through our bodies. So whether you want to call that a spirit or just energy or the source or God or whatever you want to call it, it's there. So that energy is there. And how are we transforming that energy to optimize our focus, optimize our physicality? And that's where I think, again, breath work is such a key component to doing all those things from a spiritual, mental, and physical component.
I think that sounds right. And then, okay, so you get it on a very personal level. You understand it instinctively. You understand it at a really high level, and your practice is sound. How do you translate that for the novice breather? Which is kind of a funny thing to say. We refer to this thing that we all do automatically all the time, but doing it deliberately, being present, that's the key. So, I mean, when you're, do you incorporate this in workouts? When do you onboard this and how with your clients?
Yeah, I think a client needs to, yes, in general, explaining breath mechanics and especially in the weight room and understanding how to optimize breath in lifting and also aerobic training. I think those are, again, from a performance standpoint, very important. But the foundation to even all that is, just what is my breath? Breathing in, breathing out. Am I aware of that? Am I aware of how shallow my breath is? Where am I breathing from? Am I breathing from my chest or am I breathing from my diaphragm? And I think just, yes, cognitive awareness of what your breath looks like currently, and taking note of that maybe in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evening is a great starting point, right? So in my morning breath practice, maybe it's 5 minutes of just being conscious of doing some big diaphragmic full breaths with full exhalation. And in the evening, like almost just taking a glance at where I'm sitting right now. Am I still breathing through my chest? Am I still breathing in a very sympathetic state? And noting that, and then being able to pull yourself back into a parasympathetic state with longer, bigger breaths. I think just in general, that would be a great starting point for any client or anybody who's looking to bring more consciousness to their breath, to maybe improve sleep, improve consciousness around how you act and how you react to things on a daily basis, and then also optimizing training.
Absolutely. And I like that part of our message always includes the performance element. And what we found, and I wonder if you agree with this, is that like people aren't always immediately on board with the concept that connecting to oneself and thereafter a purpose to sort of maybe the greater community, that's not always the initial instinct. And I guess that's part of where I was going with this, was like, you seem to have a good grasp of where this could go. The entry point for people is often really important. So I like what you said, like, you've got to breathe to move well. Let's start there. You want to be a great cyclist. You want to be a great weightlifter, whatever it might be. Let's start by breathing well to get this performance outcome that you want. And then we can continually sort of onboard this higher and perhaps bigger and maybe more important level of self-awareness and breathing practice.
Yeah, totally. And there's so many layers there too. I just feel like, you started working with breath and then you start working with emotions and you start working with, people's attachments. And I mean, there's so many that could go so far the other spectrum too, because when you start feeling and connecting with something as simple as breath, things show up for people. And I think a lot of ways in the world that we live in now, we don't connect to those things because it's so easy to be distracted. It's so easy just to try to get an instant gratification or a performance, like, hey, I want to be good now. Like, let me just, and I'm speaking from experience. Trust me, I didn't know my breath through, in my athletic career. I was, I'm sure I was driven sympathetically for a very long time. And I'm paying the price for it to some degrees. Like, I know, like, I've definitely worn my body like a rented suit for a long time. So there's a lot of, rebuilding of that concept. But now the availability for me to want to work on the opposite side of that is a very balancing effect. And I think some younger athletes, I think, yes, making them conscious and aware of how important breath is, how to not be distracted 24/7 on shit that's not even real, and how to stay in the moment on things that they really are driven about. Right. And I'm not going to get into why they're driven and all those things. I think that's, your own hero's journey. I think everyone at some point, a coach needs to understand everyone's on their own hero's journey. Some people will never understand breath, and some people just because they don't want to, and that's okay. Right. That's not something for me to say, well, you're not optimizing anything. Like, who's for me to say that?
Right.
This is just something that I can share and inspire others with relative to my own practice and doing it. And if I'm not going to do it, then I shouldn't even speak of it either. Right. And I just think there's tools out there and ways to recognize how we can improve ourselves through higher levels of connection, through higher levels of being. And you know what? This is leading me into this. Sport is interesting. So this is bringing back to Peru and realizing, like, what if I didn't have sport? Because I didn't have any of that there. It was like this whole other space where it's like, what if I didn't have all the things that I had that identify my Robin Lyons, right? What would be my purpose then? What would I really be trying to cultivate? And it would be, again, like just serving others, right? Whether it's in a small community or village. I'm just thinking, like, what if I had nothing that we identify ourselves with in this Western world? It would still be the purpose and the fulfillment would come from me connecting to myself and feeling like I can actually help somebody else still. Right.
Yeah.
And even in this quarantine, so pull that experience out. Now I'm into quarantine. I was talking to my coach about this the other day. I was like, what if we didn't have all this our mountain bike season? Like, we don't have it right now. Right. Yeah. Like all this stuff we were training for, like the Olympics, like people preparing for the Olympics and now not being able to do that. But what if we didn't have that? How would we still create a fulfilling life? How would we create a larger purpose still in our life that feels, without all the distractions of sport and competition and all the things that we've cling ourselves to advance us or to prove to the world or prove to ourselves that we're worth something. And this is, again, there's many takes on that. But wow, what if we didn't? Yeah. So, like, what if we didn't have those things? What if we didn't have technology? What if technology exploded? So now we're in quarantine. Now everything blew up from a technological standpoint and we have nothing. How would we show up in our days then?
I think that's a great question. I think, and I think it's one worth entertaining. I hope it doesn't happen because I think there's a lot of good that can come of it. But for me, it all comes back to this idea of intentionality. And I had a discussion with a teacher pretty recently who was so adamant that phones were crushing us and hurting his kids in all these ways. And he very well could be right. And I was definitely on board with him. But my part of the conversation, and I was there to run a mindful practice through it's exercise moving into mindfulness. So that's why I was there. So I was taking this very specific lens and view on the situation. And my take was, there's no judgment. And I think that's a core component of all this self-awareness, mindfulness, anything that looks like mindfulness or presentness or intentionality. There's no judgment on what is being done. It's really an assessment of whether or not you're doing it intentionally. And that to me is one of the biggest concerns of the phone. These kids that we were working with, truly, I'm not mad at them for being on social media. I totally get it. Billions of dollars and some of the brightest minds in the world are right there working to capture their attention. I get it. And if they could articulate the idea that they wanted to be on their phone, to have a conversation across the country, like we're doing right now, or to whatever, maybe they want to be an Instagram influencer. Maybe that's their actual goal. And they've got a good process and plan to get there and whatever. Fine. I just don't believe that that's what we're all doing. I think we're just sort of absently sucked into these devices, which are capturing our attention, and intentionality is nowhere to be seen. It's just sort of it's like one of those sci-fi movies where you're just in a motorized chair plugged into. It's a Matrix type environment. I don't want to be too dramatic, but I think that's where I am with it. And I think one of the best antidotes to the attention suck that is our highly tuned devices is coming back to the physical self, just to see where then would you want to go. I think that's meaningful. But you bring up a really good idea, a really important idea to me. I remember one time, we may have talked about this actually when we recorded the first podcast way back. I remember a time in my life post-football career when I was like transitioning into what you could then call the real world, I guess, where I was so driven. It like makes me, I get like a actual visceral feeling when I think back to this moment. I remember a moment where I was back in Chicago after traveling the world to play football, trying to think of what the next thing I could do to get something framed for my wall was.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling like sick about it. It was this amazing moment of, I was thinking through what would be next to get, some sort of accolade. And then almost immediately after, I sort of tuned in and felt like legitimately bad about it, which is why I would say, I love sports. I think it's just such a powerful platform for education. We've talked about that. I think it's massively meaningful, but only if you do it well. And actually right now, so we're working on this online powerlifting meet. I don't know if you saw that on our page at all.
Yeah, I know. Yes, looks great.
I think it's gonna be cool. I would love to share a little bit about it because I think of it differently. Like it's an online powerlifting meet. The reason we're doing it is because there might only be one sport that we could get involved in right now, and that's strength training from a distance. You can't play basketball over the internet, but we could all do our own strength-based competition and then compare. So I was like, that could be a cool idea, and then it just kept rolling. I was like, well, we definitely need to light a light at the end of the tunnel. We decided to have sort of three common opponents right now. All of us do: hopelessness, sedentary behavior, and isolation. So could we adjust that somehow? We thought this might be the thing. But I say all that to come back to your point. Powerlifting to me has only become a process than a max effort. Thoughtful process, max effort. Thoughtful process, max effort. And when you start to think of it in that way, it takes some of the stuff that I think I used to get too wrapped up in out of it. And it actually, I would say that some of the people we've had great people are signing up their teams, and I'm really excited about it. I think it's gonna be a very cool event. But the people who are a little concerned of it are usually like are fairly high caliber powerlifters who are like, well, this doesn't meet the sanctity of powerlifting as a concept. Like if your name's not on the wall at Westside Barbell, it doesn't count. It's so outcome based. And our thought, and one thing that we've been sharing with people is like, look, you might not set a world record, you might not set a personal best, but I guarantee if you really are thoughtful about your process, you'll probably set a personal best on the back end of a quarantine. And there's something to be said about that. You know what I mean? It's context, it's situation, it's process, max effort. And for me, at least, that's been a very refreshing and I think liberating way to approach sport in general these days.
No, I think it's great. I mean, it's unique, and it's kind of like something that just, I mean, trying to create something during this time is a challenge. But I think it's valid in what you're trying to do there. I think it's pretty cool. And I mean, getting, back to the process of sport and getting people involved, in sport to learn about themselves and, really learn about failure and learn about success and know that both of those work together to move us up the ladder. We don't just get one or the other. And I think, with sport as well, I think the biggest thing, I always go back to the why, and I think it's so important for kids to understand that being in the moment in your training process is the most fulfilling thing. And how do you train that? I think it comes from, creating an environment that allows that type of mindset. And I don't think every environment does that, because I think some environments are based off winning and some environments are based on development. you know.
Mhm.
And if, you know, I think at this point in my life, what I value most when I work with clients and I work in sport is the, I'm not going to say self-development. I think that's overused, but creating a space for self-realizations.
Hmm.
And self-realizations in the sense of, you know, really, you know, who am I? What are my fears? What are my motivations? And how can I use those to my benefit and align them in a way that allows me to live a life that I can show up for, not only for myself, but for others. And if I can't show up for myself, then I'm not showing up for others. So that there is a connectedness there, right?
No doubt.
Um,
Can you go back on that same note? Can you go back to the idea? So what are some of your strategies? Because you mentioned self a lot, and I hope people understand the value of that, to recognize and become connected with oneself, so that one is good for their community. There is definitely space at this moment in time to dig into that a little bit.
Absolutely. And I think what a great opportunity to dig into all of that, you know, to read the books, do your meditations, do your breath work, really journal about, you know, the things that you're struggling with. And because the more we know about ourselves, then the more that I can see myself in others. Right. If I don't work on my own things or see my own weaknesses, then I'm never going to see other people's, or will I have patience with them?
Totally.
Right. Because I'm always going to be judgmental potentially. I might act out in some type of anger around it or frustration because I can't fix this person. But I think from a coaching perspective, when you can see yourself in others, then you have this higher level of compassion and love that leads you down a path of just supporting and guiding. And that's the only thing we can do. We can't fix people, right? And this is coming from somebody who likes to fix things, okay? And it's a daily reminder for me every time when I get frustrated or I see myself create this energy that's not really contributing to the whole of what I'm trying to accomplish with this individual. I look at my own attachments, but it's because I know of those attachments, right? And I can bring a consciousness and awareness in that, and then I can pull myself back to center where it's more optimal, more beneficial, right? And trust me, that understanding of attachments and within myself is constantly expanding. This is not something that I've like, oh, I figured all of my shit out. Like, it's unfolding all the time, right? But that's life. That's the hero's journey. That's the thing. That's what makes this thing great. So yes, using this time to be quiet with yourself, to still bring joy in your life to the things that you love to do and the passions that inspire you and the things that drive you, but then also be conscious of the things that also pull you in another direction, and learn to be okay with those things and create that expansiveness to hold it, right? Don't try to cut it out of yourself. Oh, I don't like this part of me. Oh, I don't like the fact that I'm like this. You know, no. You are like, we are humans. There is good and bad in all of us. And we have, you know, having the ability to hold that and then continue leading with our true nature, which is, you know, love, compassion, joy, all the things that we naturally show up with. And that are, you know, our social conditions or other things that come into our life bring us all this fear, anger, anxiety, depression, right? We're not born with that. I'm not born, and maybe, I mean, this is just my perspective too. Somebody could
there are to anyone who'd be concerned about that comment. Of course, there are genetic predispositions and certain like physical and mechanical, but more often than not, I agree with you 100%.
Right. So I think, yeah, if you look at most babies, they look pretty innocent. Right?
Not a lot of anxious babies. worried about the next test or their.
So back to, you know, back to the innocence, back to the beginner's mind, right? Back to childlike essence. What does that even mean anymore? We're so scared to be vulnerable. We're so scared to stay open with our own ideas and our own beliefs around things, and still be open to other people's beliefs, right? And their concepts, even the strength and conditioning world. How much do we get into like what's right, what's wrong, what's working, what's not working? And somebody standing on their soapbox,
100%.
You know, for, you know.
Okay, I've got to go with you there, because I was just thinking of, man, I was just thinking about how we label things. And I'm thinking about why we get so strict with this. And I think we align on a lot of this stuff because I think both of us look outside the sphere of our immediate profession a lot. I think that might be, wow, I have a lot to say, and I hope I don't bother anyone by saying, actually, you know what? I'm okay if I do. I hope so.
It's their problem if they're bothered.
That's right.
You know,
I would like to say that we're in the nest. It's just me and you right now, but it is definitely not. We got some Instagram Live people, and we're recording this. But yeah, it's worth considering, and I'd entertain the conversation with anyone who's feeling anything but this. I think we are. This is the truth. I think we're all really afraid of death. Just hold on a sec. So I think we're afraid of death, and for that reason, timelines are so important to us. Measurable timelines are so important to us. Only once we start to quantify by time do these things start taking on different levels of meaning to us. If you say, meaning like when you, even like an I am statement, like I am anxious versus like I am feeling anxious right now. Like these are absolutes defined by stretches of time. Even the person who is anxious for 90% of their life, if you stretch out their entire life on a map and look at it from above, it's like, well, look, no, this 10% of the time you were not. You use this declarative statement. You know, it's kind of an interesting way to think about it. I think we try to name and capture too often in order to make things permanent, and I think that's a problem. All leading back to this concept that you tapped on and kind of gets me going. There seems to be something in strength and conditioning, in all fields, of course, but in strength and conditioning, there's like no, this is the right way sort of mentality. And I wonder, I think about where that comes from, and I certainly give people the benefit of the doubt more often than not. But I will tell you that there are very few things that I've come across in my time doing this that are just real absolutes. There are very few things. There are certain things I hold to. We use the term anchor a lot. Instead of an absolute, it's an anchor. And what we mean by that is, like, for example, I think squat as a movement, not as a lift even necessarily. One that can be loaded different ways, front, back, over, whatever, different muscle actions and variations. You could do it unilaterally. You can do it eccentric, whatever. But the squat as a movement pattern, as a movement, is sort of an anchor to the programming that I'm usually involved in one way, shape, or other. But it doesn't mean that I wouldn't someday reconsider that too, if I were given enough evidence to suggest that wasn't a good idea. The reason we say anchor instead of absolute is because, like, you can pull up anchor. It'll be a little harder, right? Like, you know, but if you're super deliberate and intentional and feel like, okay, I'm no longer here anymore, you can technically pull it up and move to the next spot. But I'm always really hesitant to hear people who are speaking in absolutes when it comes to this stuff, and then more hesitant when they get angry about it. And I won't go too much further on that, but have you experienced similar things? Do you know what I'm alluding to?
Yeah, well, I've experienced with myself. Yeah, I've been in those situations too, where I've believed something so strongly and got frustrated when people weren't on the same ship as me. And I think in the growth of that as an individual and the growth of that as a coach, you come to understand that there isn't absolutes. And that comes back to the core essence of understanding that we don't have control of everything in our life ever. And things are constantly changing all the time. Yeah. And what a great lesson we're learning now, how much control we don't have right now. And the fact that we need to isolate ourselves at this point. And how many people are frustrated that they can't go out and do the things that they normalize in their life and think that's normal, and that they have to change things in their life now to live this quarantine state. Well, welcome to life. Welcome to the ever-evolving, changing life that we live in. And I think in sport and in strength and conditioning, welcome to the ever-evolving, changing concepts and theories that help another individual potentially because we're willing to go there. And I'm a big back squat person. Trust me, I used to love back squats for breakfast, which I don't anymore, but I used to. I mean, yeah, man, I loved Mondays. Mondays were back squat days, and I couldn't wait to get heavy barbell on my back. Yeah. But coming from somebody who believes so strongly that everybody should squat. And now I'm having people doing, R&T reverse split, stance, squats and and rear foot elevated and single leg and goblet squats. Trust me, when goblet squats first came out, like, in my world, 8 years ago or something, I was like, who the hell, why would you do a freaking goblet squat? Like, what a waste,
Right.
But that's just, again, my own fear of like trying to expand myself and understanding movement more, right?
Totally.
And understanding that not everybody in my lane needs to squat, 300 pounds. And so I think those are just, again, learning about yourself. I think if you have something, a great thing a drill would be was like, as a strength coach, is like, what are all the things you hate in strength conditioning that you just can't stand? This guy does this guy does that. What are those things, and what are your attachments to it? Why do you give a shit? Are they really doing harm? Like, if they're doing harm, like, yeah, dude, like, I agree. Like, come on, like,
right.
Do no harm is the first rule. But I think in terms of function and application, why judge what somebody else is doing because you don't like it? What is it you don't like? Is it your fear of the unknown?
Right.
Is it the fear that you haven't, put yourself in more expansive education around what movement can really be for somebody? Because there isn't just one right way. I think there's principles. The
Right.
principles in knee flexion in general can incorporate tens of thousands of different methods, right? So,
That's totally right.
And the principles in strength conditioning, if I want to get somebody stronger, then the principle is that I need to load their nervous system to do that. If the principle of getting them to do higher repetitions for muscle endurance, then I need to lighten the load and have them do more volume. Right. So there's a principle there that never changes. Now, how I choose to do that to get that stimulus is up to the coach, right? And that's back to intention, back to like, what is the intent of the exercise? What is the intent of the training? And then all of a sudden you start just working off principles. There's nothing that's really wrong. It's just like, is it working?
That's it.
Is it doing harm, etc.? Yeah.
That's it. You're exactly right. And principle and anchor, I think, are sort of synonymous in the way that we're talking about it, because that's actually you're absolutely right. If one of your principles or one of your anchors is do no harm, then there's a really clear heuristic there. Like you either are or you aren't doing harm. That's the measure. Not like, are you doing Bulgarian split squats versus traditional back squats? These are all essentially tools at your disposal to be used and applied as you see fit based on the context and probably the people you're working with, hopefully, if you're doing it right. But the do no harm is something to come back to. That feels fair. To be super intentional about our decision-making as coaches, that's a solid principle.
Totally. And if you have a basic exercise science background, you understand loading perimeters and strength conditioning, then your exercise selection will change based on your intent.
And it'll
right. A goblet squat for some people isn't going to give them the stimulus they need to get really strong and fire, MVC, max voluntary contraction. If that is my goal for a client, then goblet squat probably isn't the exercise selection. If they can't squat, then maybe goblet squat is, right? So now we're going back to form and technique. But if they're great squatters and I need to get them strong, then hell yeah, we're back squatting for days. We're going to do the whole cycle. We're going to get this thing dialed, right? So yeah, there's so many things in that. But if you stick to principles, you usually can't go wrong there or put somebody in danger.
You can't, because you just continue to come back to that question, like, did it work or not? And there's a humility that comes with that I think is really important, because as you mentioned, in all things we've discussed today, we keep coming back to this idea of evolution, whether it's self, practice, profession, whatever. You have to evolve. The only way to evolve, you can't evolve if you say, no, this is the way. You evolve, you say, like, this is the way we're going now. Is it achieving the outcome that I hoped for? Am I still living by those principles? I'll tell you, I am really, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I'm like totally open about this. We are trying to host a powerlifting meet on the back end of a stretch where a lot of people aren't going to have access to big, heavy loads. Now, we've actually, a lot of our people that have signed up for so far do have home gyms and stuff like that. So different category. But there are some people who are trying to make it through a 2 or 3 week stretch, say, or hopefully not too much longer, but we'll see, loading in different ways. And actually, Chad Wesley Smith, you know that name?
You heard of him? Yes.
Juggernaut training, big time power lifter. He put something out essentially addressing this idea of how to stimulate the nervous system in certain ways to maintain power and essentially bridge the gap till you can have a barbell in your hands again. And ultimately we'll get back to the idea of like, well, did it work or not? It's as simple as that. Like here are the principles. This is why we believe it makes sense. And it's going to, like I said, I have a feeling that not a lot of people are going to set all-time world records, but I do think it'll give us some really interesting stuff to look at. It'll be a lot to look at. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, man, the nervous system's interesting because powerlifting, I look at that as just a big nervous system stimulus. There's so much that we have to have aligned in terms of like the capacity to dig deep and lift a lot of load, and the qualifier to that is your nervous system. Nervous system is king in powerlifting. So an interesting concept, depending on the training age of the athlete, depending on the biological age of the athlete.
Yep.
I would almost say that important factor right now in the next 2 or 3 weeks, really in the weight room, I wouldn't be looking at, oh man, I'm going to get them really strong and setting PRs at this point. It'd almost be like a taperish aspect where what are the things I'm doing outside the weight room that's going to contribute to revamping my nervous system for max expression, right?
Yep.
And maybe it's like cleaning up the gut. Maybe it's, improving my sleep. The things that are going to create a larger capacity for the nervous system to translate into recruiting max voluntary contraction. Now we know there's a training stimulus to that. We know we have to train the nervous system to fire all those units. But if some of these kids have already been doing that, a lot of it now is just like freshening up the nervous system to be able to do max expression. And maybe it's not setting a whole new like world record, like you said, but maybe it's keeping pretty close to their best ever without without as much training as they thought they needed. That would be, something eye-opening for these kids that understand is like, wow, I don't need to crush my soul, but I can actually, do the little things in between that, before I didn't pay attention to because I could just hit the weight room as hard as I wanted to. But now actually I can like stay hydrated, get my sleep, track all that, and really refine that practice.
Yep.
Go into the setting, express myself there. And then hopefully after that training of understanding themselves in that practice outside the gym, they can continue leading through that. And now when they actually get to that training point where they can get those hits all the time with a good foundation of health. Now what are we looking at? Now we're looking at a lot of PRs.
100%. Hey, you're right. And it reminds me of the coaches who get addicted to one style of training. Again, I continue to kind of qualify my statements. No offense to those coaches, but I know that I've fallen victim to this. Like if I have a barbell, if I have access to a barbell, I for sure am doing less single leg work, because I want this stimulus. I want to feel that. You get. I agree with you. I like that. Revamp the nervous system for max expression. And that might come back to some of the really basic stuff, like you said, clean up your gut. There's no excuse for not getting adequate sleep right now. But I'll tell you, a lot of people we're talking to still aren't, right? And that goes back, that's self-awareness, purpose, and self-management, right? Those are really interesting ideas. And I'll also tell you, we talked to someone who is a 2 times body weight squatter, really young to be doing, like pretty strong kid, solid, strong kid, but can't do single leg work to save his life pretty much. But in this moment, coming back to that, I'm really excited to see some of these, what feel like maybe slower, more deliberate practices map onto positive outcomes in the weight room. And like you said, it may not be this time around. Maybe they're at or near something they've done before, but down the road, if you start to clean this stuff up, your top end outcome has just changed dramatically, I would suggest.
Maybe the challenge isn't like trying to hit your PR at the end. Maybe your challenge is improving pieces that you've pushed aside, that are weaknesses or whatever you want to say, but just lack of consciousness around those items. What are those things, and how can we improve compliancy towards the things that are going to impact your overall performance when we're done this thing, right? 100%. That's kind of the approach I've used with the current clients I'm working with now at Mountain Lab is, just kind of addressing like, hey, like this is the time to like prepare your food, to like work on sleep patterns, in bed at 10, up at 6. We're having a challenge of that right now. Sitting down at the table and chewing your food 30 times before swallowing it, like little things like of just being more conscious of and having time for, and not just looking to Instagram and social media or Netflix as ways to escape and try to feel better. Like, come on, use
Right.
this time really in something that we can like use after we're out of quarantine, after we're out of this time of silence. And that's what I'm saying. Like, yeah, there's that consciousness and awareness and intention that, we're given this time. Like, you look at this as like a gift,
Yep.
as opposed to looking at it as like a restriction and a punishment. And then I'm just going to Netflix myself to death until I can get it through this piece. Like, that's just an unconscious behavior that I feel isn't being benefiting anybody and not even themselves.
Yeah, I love this because we're down the back stretch in time, and you've just brought it full circle. That's a very I like and I mean that because there's a self-awareness piece to that. Like, if you look, the way you name things matter. If you look at this place and time like you're grounded,
Mm-hmm.
that's a mistake. It's going to dictate how you experience this time. If you look at it like, holy cow, I now have the time and space to do all the things I always told myself I didn't have time and space for. Then
Yeah.
what a gift.
Yes.
It's such an incredible gift. And just, and I think, as I hear you say that and I reflect on some of my own stuff, I know that I would compensate. I competed in February, and I would compensate for bad habits in my regular life, like shortcutting my sleep, not, eating from a vending machine when I didn't have access to proper nutrition. It didn't happen very often, Robin. But like,
I'm like,
yeah, but we actually just revamped our vending machines at the school that I work at. So that's
wait.
a conversation, but it's actually a pretty cool one. But the point is, when I wasn't getting the other stuff right, I would just go to what I would ramp up what I thought I knew. So I'd add an extra set or two on squat. I'd throw some more weight on in deadlift, and I think I did that because in part, again, out of sort of like a time pressure, like a subliminal, underlying, deep-seated time stress. Like I've got to get ready for this meet. I didn't sleep well. I didn't eat that well. What option do I have? Well, I've got this small window of time to train. I'm gonna get aggressive there. And I know, and that's not just, I wouldn't say it's necessarily bad to approach what you're doing with intensity. I think I'm cool with that. But I also know that also gave me occasionally the opportunity to override proper movement patterns with more intensity. And that is, if we're just looking through the training perspective, now is a time where, like, I'm not going to name who it is, but I'm doing like lunges with a person on my back and like trying to find creative ways to, and just going slow and like really trying to nail the movement, and like knee to foot alignment, knee to hip to foot. Like, what does that look like? And just slowing down, trying to read books that I haven't had time to read and things of that nature. So I guess as we move through this, I'm really interested. So you've said it already, but if you had to give advice to people at this kind of strange moment in time, physical, mental, whatever you want, what would that advice look like?
Well, the advice that I'm giving the people that I'm working with right now, number one is treating this like, it's kind of like a taper. And I say a taper in training. So yes, being conscious in the movement that you're doing and really connecting to movement. Really connecting to movement in a way that not just physically, but mentally and spiritually. And that means potentially getting out on the mountain. That means potentially getting on your bike and breathing and being unplugged while doing it. And then in the weight room, like, for us right now, it's a lot of it's home workouts for people. There isn't that massive stimulus that we've been chasing. So, maybe it is a little bit of like qigong with breath work followed by a slight movement prep. And really just doing movement that brings you into consciousness and into connection with self. And how much have we trained so hard that we disconnected from our own selves, right? Yeah. And it's almost an escape to do so. But now, like, really bringing that back to a point of like, how can I move today that's going to really, bring me back into my body and emotionally or spiritually bring me into a place of like, just, oh man, I feel good today. I feel inspired now. It's like it's a movement of inspiration. And instead of just a stimulus and a hit of like shortcomings, let's say for most, and then this is again, something I've experienced. Like when I lifted heavy, it was a way for me to escape and a way for me to get a short hit of adrenaline, right? And cortisol. So instead of chasing adrenaline, cortisol, how about we chase spirituality, mental mindfulness, let's just say, and the physical body, in terms of that. And I think that's a great time. I think it's a great time to do that. And it's not forever. Everyone's going to survive, and if anything, you're going to feel better afterwards. And you're also going to have a greater capacity to train harder. So yeah. That's what a taper does. A taper allows us to restore and create that volume, that expansion of capacity to take on more things. And I have its diagram in my office that I drew. It's like a continuum. It's a line like this, and on the one end, it's like, you can put anything that polarizes on it. But let's just say, restoration here and intensity on the other side. And we don't want to be too far on this side too long, right? We need to get back to restoration. But the more that I can relax and restore, the more I can really go to that far side, the continuum of really recovery and restoration, the more that band expands where I can go higher intensity, right? But if I'm never really fully going back to restoration, my bandwidth gets shorter, actually, because I keep pushing this end, but I never meet myself on the other. And so that life force, that expansiveness only comes through the balance of full restoration and full intensity expression, right?
Yeah.
And so with that explanation, use this time to restore and reflect and rebuild and continue expanding that life force and that energy that's going to allow us to express ourselves in the way that we love to do. How we want to engage in the world, continue broadening that bandwidth to do so. So now's the time to do that. And then all the little things, being conscious in your food, right? We're at home now. We should be able to prep and really get into it. I mean, I got all my cilantro and parsley, and trust me, typically this is not what I do. I don't sit there and chop cilantro, but right. I'm doing it. I'm putting in the quinoa. I'm being conscious around the food I'm eating and not just unconsciously eating, right? And if I do, being aware of that, what am I trying to avert from? What am I trying to push away through this unconscious food or unconscious drinking consumption, right? Which we all do, but again, just understanding it. So learn about yourself during this time. The little acts, the little sleeping, the little rituals, the little things that we're doing. Be conscious and learn about yourself. Journal, write about it, Yeah. I don't know. I think this is a time to do that. So without going on more of a tangent.
I love it. I think you're exactly right. And you've mentioned journaling a couple of times. I think trying to put words probably can't express everything that's going on right now, but trying to put words to it is often a really helpful exercise for people. So I really like that you say that. So a question this time, we talk about self-talk a lot. Literally, we do this. We can explain what we're doing. We can rationalize it. Is this similar to the dialogue that's going on in your head, or what sort of self-talk have you used to move you from one stage to the next? Do you ever find that is that it becomes more challenging, and you have a certain sort of self-talk, or I won't lead any further, but what does that look like between the years?
My own dialogue?
Your own.
How I talk to myself? Oh man. Well, I think, how much dialogue do we go through that we're not even conscious of? We're always thinking.
Yeah.
Right. And I think if you want to connect more to that and understand it, I think for me, it is sitting still, breath work, meditation, having something in the day that allows me to connect to those thoughts, or not maybe connect to them, but at least be conscious of them. Because that unconsciousness that continues running through my brain is leading me in a direction. And so
maybe what do you say to get yourself back in those moments?
I think you have to know when you're out. You have to know when you're not connected. So, let me just sort of think, it happens every day for me. I think to say that I have things figured out and I'm constantly thinking in a way that I want to think all the time is a false statement for anybody, right? We're constantly battling our own thoughts. But, I think when it's basically getting my brain in alignment and my thoughts in alignment to where my heart is, so if my heart is, let's just say my service to the greater whole is using my gifts as a strength conditioning coach to help others, guide them down a path that's, healthy and fulfilling, then I think my heart and my thoughts need to be in alignment of that. If my brain starts creating stories of why I can't do that, or why I'm not good enough, or my whatever things that we tell ourselves that lead us off the path of our purpose, I think that's just a misalignment of brain and heart. So how do we stay connected to our heart and our purpose? Putting in practices that remind us of that, being interested in and curious around ourselves and our own demons, and knowing that they are okay to be there and we can be there with them. I think yeah, the self-investigation, but also when I catch myself not aligned in a way that I want to live my life. And this is a great question, so I'm thinking off the top of my head, but when I'm not engaging in a way that I want to engage, right? If I'm reacting, if I'm frustrated, if I'm not living how I want to express myself, then I know there's a misalignment somewhere, or there's an attachment to something that I'm just, managing with. I'm not actually looking at it and not staying curious around it. So yes, I ask myself the question, what is my attachment to this frustration? What is my attachment to this person that's in front of me that I'm not liking about how they're acting, and how is that connected to me? Right. And so I think having that introspection is a great tool, because then it aligns you to take a deep breath and go, oh, that's just because I don't like myself in that way either.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm, and then you just take a breath, and then you align your heart and your thoughts, and you continue on your way. And I don't know if that really answers your question, but that's how I think about something.
I think it does. Am I right to say that the self-talk, the explicit thing I heard you say was that maybe you're asking yourself, what am I attached to? Like, you recognize the feeling. The feeling is inspiring something else, and that something else is you asking yourself, what is making me feel like this? What am I attached to? Does that sound right, or is that?
Yeah, you have to notice, and then that's where it comes back to knowing yourself a little bit, right? And that's the journey we're all on.
No doubt.
We never get to the end point of that, like this peak climb that, like, oh, here's my higher self, I made it. Like, never happens. We're constantly refining that and learning about ourselves and unfolding this onion of layers of feelings and who we are as humans. But I think continue staying curious around why you don't like this one thing, or why you don't like this one person, or why you don't have a relationship with your mom and dad, or why, like, being curious around yourself allows you to come back and recognize when you are attaching to your own shit, basically, and then not showing up and engaging in a way that is about a greater whole, or about that person that's sitting in front of you, right? Take off your filters of your own things, and then be able to sit there with somebody and just be that. That is something I think a lot of us can continue refining, but it's a part of, like, the human experience, in terms of, like, how am I really going to see this person for who they are, without just with my own blinders and filters of how I think something should be. Right.
So I guess, is your self-talk, is it a lot of, you mentioned curiosity, is it just the question why? Like, like, do you keep going back to that?
Yeah.
Why?
Totally. Self-talk, man.
And maybe this is just a moment to examine. And I'll give you an example. Like, if I try to practice, like, mindfulness, if I'm trying to do something and I find myself just coming back to being present, I will find, I just say, there's only this, that's, and whatever. And I didn't plan that, I didn't cue that up, but, like, when I'm in the middle of trying to just slow down and be present, and other stuff starts coming in, I just say, there's only this. Like, that's like my thing. There's only this. And let that go. I think at the times in my life when I've been better at it than others, I have been able to, and I actually learned this when I was in grad school. It's either a box or a balloon. So, like, if a thought creeps in, there's no judgment. That's one of the things. Like, you're not supposed, you don't assess the thoughts, you don't judge them. I have, just sort of being who I am, tried to decide if I'm putting this thought in a box or a balloon. And I'll say, there's only this. This thing creeps in. I either put it in a box and, like, put it over there for a moment, and I can come back to you later, or I will try to develop the very subtle awareness that like, I'll put it in a balloon and just kind of let it go. That doesn't even need to be here. And I think, whatever, that's been helpful for me, but it all comes back to the idea there's only this.
Yeah, I think that reminds me. So in sport, what I used to do if I felt like I lost my focus, or a negative thought came in, right? Something that's not contributing to me performing well. Tree it used to be something I used to say. Tree it, like freaking like boom, gone. Like that thought doesn't belong here. And it would be an expression like tree it. People probably thought I had Tourette's, but it would be like, I would just say like, just move that thought out of my head and pull back in the thought and reinforce it with a thought that I want to focus on, a state that I want to be in. And that's an interesting concept because now I feel like that's evolved for me. I don't feel like we can just get rid of our things, right? I think a lot of it is being okay with the fear of that, and then showing up in the way that you want to show up and continue practicing that. But I think in sport, that was one thing I used to do with self-talk is like exterminating a negative thought and then replacing it with a thought that I want, a state that I want to be in. And then in that sense, for me on a day-to-day basis, I think your statement of like, this is all there is something I find when I do breath work, like this is all there is, like, or when I sit at my computer and I'm going to do computer work, like, that's a great statement. I'm going to use that actually. Like, this is all there is right now. Let's stay focused and be productive in this practice. And the programs that I'm going to write for these clients, let's stay conscious in that and stay intentional. So yeah, I think I do that, but I think the self-talk kind of pulled me off because I don't use that word self-talk, but I think
sure.
A mindfulness practice for sure.
We all do it. So part of the asking of that question is just to stimulate awareness around it, because I will say that what we find digging into, especially younger populations, I don't think that's true. I think a lot of people, you're using it, you're naming things, we're doing it all the time. There is a dialogue going on in our heads, and I think it's if you're interested in this at all, Ellen Langer is someone we've referenced on the show many times. She literally wrote the book on mindfulness, but she wrote it before it was super popular, and she doesn't practice mindfulness in the way that I think we would think of it. She is an advocate of arriving at a state of mindfulness, a state of presentness. She has a very different strategy, but she's like, she doesn't do yoga, she doesn't meditate, none of that stuff. But to be mindful and present is absolutely, and her book is divided into two. The first half is all about mindlessness and the dangers of it, and then the second is all about mindfulness. And she talks about just the way that you name, even you think about people, like is somebody annoying, or do they have great energy? If you name it, if you say Brian is so annoying, then the next time Brian comes into the room, and that's just sort of going on in your head unintentionally, the next time Brian comes in the room with great energy, well, Brian's annoying. If you say, Brian's got great energy, he's, then when he comes in the same way, it's received differently. And we don't even recognize that we sort of dictated that situation by the way we were subconsciously naming it. So that's I don't know, that's been a powerful thing for
That's interesting. So she doesn't meditate or use any practices like that. How does she see mindfulness then?
Well, I don't want to give away her book, but no, it's for her. She doesn't judge those things either. She essentially says, however you find yourself at that mindful place, great. She just doesn't, she personally just doesn't meditate and do yoga. She notices. So her thing is, and I don't know if it's 2 or 3, but she just notices 2 new things about the person you're dealing with, the place that you're in, and it's not judgment. It's not like, oh, so and so is fatter, it's not. It's like, oh, and I try to do that myself sometimes too. I'm like, oh, there's a crack in the baseboard right there, like whatever. It's just notice, just come back to being present, and there is something sort of surprisingly simple and profound about that. because
Yes.
what does that mean? It means that there's only this thing. There's not, I'm not worried about who's texting me or whatever. It's just there's the baseboard, and there happens to be a crack in it. And I never noticed that before. So if you can go, if you can notice two things, for her at least, and of course, practice makes it a lot easier. For some people that might not be sufficient, but if you're able to sort of harness your attention quickly, then that's powerful too. I think probably from my own experience and from a lot of people we deal with, if you have some sort of mindful practice, whether it's a breathing practice or a yoga or a meditative practice, then the ability to do the quick version, just the noticing, is probably enhanced. Because there's actually some documentation about like neural networks and how to arrive at these states. And it's like, the more you walk the path, the easier it is to get to the place.
Yeah. Cause I was going to say, it's almost that, I mean, that is a meditative state, but without calling it meditation, because when I'm just noticing without attachment, to me, that's meditation.
Yeah.
Well, but that's just how we label it. I mean, I think, noticing is something we do in our consults. Like, and I work with my coaches on, is sitting there without our 10 filters of how we, our social conditions, our religion, all the things that we built our, belief systems on, and then how we see somebody when they say something, it triggers us in a certain way. Right. So being able to take all those filters off and just notice without being, attached to what that means to you.
Right.
Right.
It doesn't have to be anything more than it is. In fact, if we really want to go meta with it, it isn't anything more than it is. If there's anything else, we brought it to the situation. So I think
there's the storylines that show up, and that's from a mental state, right? Like, feelings are from your heart, emotions come from mind. Stories, like our stories of like our own perceptions on things and our own experiences that have created this cognition of how we see something. And I think with that simplicity of this is all there is, and what it is what it is. Like, without us trying to make it mean something, right?
Right. It's so good. We well, I won't keep you all day, but I do have a lot more to discuss. Maybe it's at some point down the line in our lives, because it really, all of this is we have this concept called practical mindfulness, and it is for the person who's not yet ready to go on a retreat, but it's just a moving through the course of a day, the course of a profession, of course of a relationship, asking yourself regularly if your behavior matches your goal. And there's a self-awareness in that. There's an intentionality in that. There's an ownership. This is your behavior. This is what we are doing. Does your behavior match your goal? The first part of that is identifying what your goal is in the situation. It doesn't have to be a championship of any kind. It could just be, my goal this morning included getting some coffee. It could be just as simple as that. And in this moment, do my behaviors map onto that or not? It's that easy. Speaking of, and bringing this full circle, I guess, for the second time, or just capping, what sort of coffee did you have this morning?
1 second.
Show me.
And I'll also bring out how I made my coffee. This is the coffee edition.
Coffee edition.
First of all, coffee brought to you by Cartel Coffee Lab.
Wait. You got to say that one more time. Instagram.
Not sponsored, by the way. This is just free advertising for them.
It's free advertising for the moment, but I think they need to sponsor you. Who is it again?
Cartel Coffee Labs.
Are they out by you?
And they're out. No, I was in Tucson a couple weeks ago, and I picked up, this is a coffee shop I used to go to quite a bit when I lived in Arizona. And yeah, so that's that. And if you want to know what kind of bean, it's a Papua New Guinea single origin. And then I made it in my fancy pour over. Yeah. So this is what's left, which I'm going to probably throw out, but that's my pour over. These are from Phoenix Industries in Salt Lake. And then I poured it into I went with a classic mug today. Usually I have a mug selection, and I went with my Paya Bay coffee bar in Maui. This is one of my favorite coffee bars I go to. And I felt like that this morning. I usually go by feeling, like the mug calls me. It's not like I just pick a cut. This is a very intuition, like mug calling every morning. So I have a very broad selection, which makes it fun.
I love that.
Yeah.
I totally identify with the mug calling you. I've got a whole assortment
right?
the same way.
Yeah, totally.
I usually go with grinding my own. I don't have a pour over. I should probably get that. Today I got a Hero Coffee, which is just down the block. And you mentioned the hero's journey a couple times in today's conversation.
Yeah.
It's kind of perfect. I love
awesome.
that we talked about the hero's journey and timeline also. I don't mean to, like, I keep trying to wrap us up, and I like talking to you. So, but if you think about like the hero's journey, like the hero's journey usually culminates, at least in the telling of the story, with something fantastic, right? I wonder if people recognize that after the hero has like slayed the dragon or whatever has occurred, that this hero still has plenty of time left in his or her life. So again, if you pull back and look at the entire life on a timeline, I wonder if that helps us weight things, like give appropriate weight to certain moments in time. I can't help but think about that. I think
oh my gosh, that's like a whole other freaking that's a whole other conversation that you just brought up.
We'll just say part 2. I drink coffee every day, so.
Like, you can't just leave it on, well, here's another thought. Like, yes, yeah, that's true.
I think a lot of thoughts, Robin. That's what
thinking. Oh yeah, there's this drill I was doing in meditation the other day. I was like, you're supposed to note like Pema Chödrön, I'm sure like the Buddhist monk, female Buddhist monk. Anyway, so part of her practice is like learning to like meditate and be like thinking. Like anytime a thought comes, you just label it thinking, right? So no matter what it is. So I was like, this is like torture, thinking. Yeah. And so then it was like ongoing joke, like in the office, I'm like thinking.
Yeah.
So yeah, thinking.
Nonstop thinking. Well, we can well, and to be totally honest, man, there's so many opportunities for tangents and podcasts too. But that alone can be kind of overwhelming for people. Sincerely, once you recognize that that this thing isn't stopping until it's stop. It'll stop once. You know what I'm saying? Like, but that it's not stopping. Then we really do get to this idea that management is the only way, and that idea in itself can be mapped onto or shared in so many other areas. Like you talk about stress. I'm a huge advocate of stress. Not from an evolutionary perspective, it's the only reason that we're here. From a training perspective, it's the only reason we improve, psychologically, physically, all the above. But I wonder, and again, maybe this is a moment in time to have conversations like this. It's like, it's not about stress avoidance so much as it is about stress management, and like the scale that you mentioned before. What sort of a stressor is neither good or bad inherently. The way that you name it makes incredible, like gives it whatever weight it has. And then, like you said, the amount that you recover from it will give it whatever power it may or may not have. But interesting. All right.
I have a whole drawing on that thing. Like that one line that I talked about is one piece of the drawing that is freaking like, dude, like, yeah, we should do another podcast or something.
Let's do it. I'm not kidding. This might be obvious. I got nothing. So I'm pretty flexible these days. We have guests coming on, but yeah, if you wanted to even like bring that out, if you got like a whiteboard or whatever.
Yeah, I'll set up in my office next time.
I think that's a great idea. All right. Well, until then, I'll send you a text and we'll figure that out. I hope people enjoyed today's. I'll share more when we put it out in a different format. Okay. If the audio is good enough, we're gonna put it out as a podcast if you're cool with that. And we'll see how much I can get onto YouTube. So we'll be in touch about that, and we'll queue up the next conversation. I always legitimately really enjoy it. So thank you.
Yeah, no, it's always good. And I'll trade you equipment there. I want a hat.
Done.
What kind of hat is that?
These are Richardson.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, you can tell a good Richardson from.
Yes, I want a Richardson. Absolutely. And yeah, I'll send you out. We have a Richardson hat too.
Oh, do you? Heck
so,
yeah. Done. Trade.
Okay.
It's a trade.
Okay.
All right, deal. All right, Robin, thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure.
You rock. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, sounds good.